Ladies and gentlemen, we have the next panel, Science at the Table, Linking Research Policy and Public Narratives. And I'd like to call on stage Shrishti Chaudhary, Abhijit Madhumdar, and Tejaswini as moderator. And joining us live, Honorable Member of Parliament, Jairam Ramesh. So, over to you.
Hello, yeah, thank you. Hello, welcome everyone. The final panel of SJAI. Congratulations, you've made it to the finish line. And so today's panel is about the link between science, policy, and journalism. Today we have a really amazing set of people in our panel. As you can see, joining us virtually, there's Mr. Jairam Ramesh, the Honorable MP in the Rajya Sabha. He has had a long and illustrious career, being a Minister of Environment in 2009 and being a Minister of Rural Development in 2011, and where he was a part of a lot of public discourse about science, which supporters and naysayers agree is a really commendable way of handling science topics. Next we have Dr. Abhijit Majumdar. He's a professor of chemical engineering at IIT Bombay, and he leads the Majumdar lab, and one of the most recent works is making a placenta on chip. So basically, historically, pregnant women have been, excluded from clinical trials for obvious reasons. And this tool can someday potentially be a tool to help assess how drugs work in pregnant women biology. He's also very active on social media and enjoys communicating science in different forms and connecting with the wider audience. So, thank you. Then we have Shrishti Chaudhary. She's the Senior Assistant Editor at CNN News.
Recording in progress.
And she has had decades of experience with a variety of media. So this includes print, broadcast, and now digital media as well. She's also an Oxford Climate Journalism Network Fellow and reports on emerging issues in climate, space, biodiversity. And we're really happy to have you too. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Jairam Ramesh. Hi. Thank you for joining. And I'd like to give an overview of our audience. So this is the Science Journalists Association, and we have a lot of science journalists, communicators, people who talk about science in a broad type of formats, including archivists, people from All India Radio, and all of us here are trying to understand how we can, communicate science without spreading misinformation and, being true to the nuance. So with that, I'd like to start. I'd like to start with a question to you, Mr. Ramesh,
sure.
About how to, we want to understand how science policies are made. So during your time as the Minister of Environment and Forests, you were involved in an issue which was one of the widest discourses in public about science, the introduction of BT brinjal in India. And it resulted in a moratorium which still exists today. And while there were critics and supporters, one thing which has been widely accepted is everybody really appreciated the way that you handle and the way that you understood the, understanding of scientists, and you got them on board. And so what was that process like? What were your thoughts while doing it? And what insights from that time do you think are still valid in this rapidly evolving, scientific climate where we have AI, we have biotechnologies like CRISPR, and cybersecurity, biosecurity. So what are insights from that time which even ring true today for science policy?
Well, I think the environment and the ecosystem for communication has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. So the different types of media have come into prominence. The issues have become far more complex, and communication has become far more abbreviated and far more instantaneous. So the time for analysis, the time for deep examination has been severely curtailed. So that's been a fundamental change in the ecosystem of communication. You need to be able to communicate faster. You need to be able to communicate in a pithy, in a more concise way, and you need to be able to communicate on a real-time basis, which was not necessarily the case 20 years ago. However, what has not changed is the fact that science communication still, you ask the question, how is science policy made? And what has not changed is the nature of making science policy, which remains largely a technocratic exercise, largely an exercise confined to a small peer group who then decide, what is good for the rest of society. So the BT Brinjal case, you said it was appreciated, but I can tell you, I've also been severely criticized for it by very many people, and I'm still at the receiving end of criticism. But what I tried to do in that BT Brinjal exercise, and a few other instances, is to democratize the nature of decision making, to get public feedback, to get different institutions, academic institutions, get activist organizations, get labor unions into the process of formulating policy. See, our model is experts formulate the policy and then we have to accept the policy. So I think the big challenge for us is to democratize and open up the process of decision making, after which the job is really to communicate those decisions to a larger public.
Yeah, thank you. And so we are talking about linking, science to policy in a more effective way. So, what do you think is the role of scientists in terms of providing relevant evidence? And is there something that scientists can do to make the research more policy ready? So currently, because of the publish or perish dynamic, the kind of data that scientists might create would be academically rigorous, but may not be contextualized in a way that is applicable to the wider public discourse. So is there something, that scientists can do to, bridge the gap from their side?
Well, I'll tell you two things from my long experience. I've grown up in a scientific ecosystem. I went to a scientific institution. I studied science for many years. Scientists are notorious communicators. Scientists are not necessarily the most effective communicators. So first, they have to learn how to communicate. And secondly, scientists are not necessarily known for their humility. You have to be able to appreciate different points of view. There could be questioning in science. Science progresses only when conventional assumptions are questioned. The spirit of inquiry, So fundamentalism has no place in science. The spirit of questioning, the spirit of inquiry. So I would say two things. One is the ability to communicate, and two, the ability to listen, the ability to get different points of view and harmonize that point of view. Too often I find scientists sitting on a high pedestal thinking that they have a better knowledge than the rest of the people, than the rest of society. I don't think that is always the case. And I think so, therefore, the scientists have to really get off their high perch and learn to, be with people with different disciplinary backgrounds and then be able to communicate. I found some people extraordinary communicators, but most people, in my experience, in scientists, they speak in jargon, they speak in their own language, and they are really appealing to their own community and not necessarily to the non-scientific community.
Sure. Lots of points raised. I would like to now ask Dr. Majumdar, for your perspective as a scientist, how do you currently communicate science and what are your restrictions? Because I'm sure that you also find certain bottlenecks while communicating. There are certain apprehensions and historical, bad examples set before. And so what is your side of the story to this?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that first of all, I would agree to, Mr. Jairam Ramesh completely that we are bad communicator mostly. And the second thing is that, even before learning how to communicate, we first need to appreciate the need for communication to the general public, which is largely lacking. We kind of live in our own ivory tower, inside our own echo chamber, and we are kind of happy there. So that is something needs to be broken. Now, but coming to that, now the challenges that we face, and that is I'm kind of talking from my own personal experience also, that many of the times, thanks to our training, that we even don't consider some jargon as jargon. When I'm talking something, I'm using jargons without even realizing that those terms are jargons, right? And I think a fantastic way to overcome that is to communicate to the different sets of people. And again, from my personal experience, I can tell, as you know, I work in the area of organ on chip, novel alternative methods, etc. And I often go to the schools and talk to the school children. And when I have to talk to the school kids, I have to break it down to the, essentially the absolute, conceptual, intuitive level so that they can grasp it. And trust me, many of the times kind of question that I get from them, those I will say much more superior than that I get in a scientific conference. So I think it's a two-way street. It is beneficial for both the sides if we learn how to communicate. I would say that now in today's era, we have started to understand the importance of communication. At least I would talk about my generation as well as my next generation. And the other thing also I agree with Mr. Ramesh is that because now something is so instantaneous, everything is so reactive. As you said, I am very active on the social media, but at the same time, I'm very scared that one wrong use of the word can be taken out of the context and can be put into, you don't know what. You know that even the faculty members have faced so many different issues in the recent past. So, yes, it is very much essential for us to communicate, but at the same time, because of this whole reactive situation right now, I'm also scared to kind of, communicate freely, I should say.
Okay. So I would like to ask now, Shrishti, you are at this interface where you talk to both scientists and policymakers, and you would also be facing some communication challenges. And also you have been a witness to whatever, grievances have been. Can you give your insight over why these things occur and what are the solutions to, like he said, interacting with more audiences, but from a journalistic point of view, how can these differences be overcome or these communication gaps be filled?
Well, good evening, everyone. See, the relationship between journalist and scientist is essentially based on trust and confidence. Now, I can personally tell you when I started out doing science journalism, it took a lot of convincing. When I spoke to scientists and there was some interesting research coming out, I had to really convince them that you can really trust me with your research, and I have to kind of, give a background because I come from a science background. I did my education in biotechnology, so that kind of helped. But yes, there is some kind of a challenge there that I'm sure all science journalists have faced in the early part of their career. And I'd agree with what Mr. Jairam Ramesh also said, that that gap is still there. And this, in a time like this where we are living, where there's a lot of miscommunication and there's a lot of misinformation, it's highly important that relationship between scientists and journalists remain intact. Especially now, because see, if you as a scientist, as an expert who has done research on a certain field, if you don't speak now, then that gap will lead, that gap will create a space of somebody who doesn't have enough information to be the spokesperson to put that information out there. And in absence of that credible information, mainstream media, I would say, would pick it up. So, and it's far more important when it comes to issues that we are facing on a daily basis. Now, this is winter. We all have been reading stories, a lot of stories about air pollution in Delhi. Of course, there's the Yamuna pollution. So, in all these areas, it's very important for scientists who have been doing research in these areas to keep the lines of communication open. Because, again, like to highlight, I think it was highlighted in the previous sessions also, we as science journalists are communicators essentially. We are not experts. So I'm sure when the news cycle is really churning, our editors expect us to give the information out, to probably explain the stories, but we have a very tight window there. Luckily, a lot of science institutes, by going by my experience, have evolved, have understood that thing. We have understood that digital media is really booming. Earlier, when most of the science journalism was restricted to print media, we still had some time. Like, if there's an important issue coming up, I would reach out to the institute, mostly the communication cell. I would write an email that probably they'll respond back. It'll take some time. But now, I'm afraid we don't have that much of time. So it's important that we have that immediate communication. There are certain institutes I would really like to commend. IIT Bombay is one actually, where they communicate their research. They understand that, of course, this research is of public interest, right? They would give the link of the research, and they would also suggest, because until we talk to the researcher or the scientist who has done that research, I'm sorry, but we as journalists cannot really do a good job with it. So I think that's far more important for that line of communication to remain open.
So, Srishti, thanks for kind of bringing up this IIT Bombay thing. I just quickly kind of trying to say that what IIT Bombay is following, and I think it is fantastic. So basically, we are collaborating with one of the science communication agency. They pick some of the articles or the research articles that we have published in that month. Then they send those selected articles to one of us. We looked at those articles and then we comment on that whether these are ready to go for public. So we kind of wait on it. Then they talk to that particular, the scientist, get either the story written by the scientist or they put some questions, scientists answer and they make the story. Once the story is ready, again it goes back to the scientist vet it that, okay, this is factually correct. It does not end there. It comes back to the institutional committee to look again that everything is in proper order or not. After that, that science communication agency, they publish it to the kind of for the general consumption. So just to tell that the whole process.
Really good example of the solutions we are developing today. So now I want to go back towards policy a bit. Dr. Abhijit, you have been involved in research, emerging research in the field of NAMs, so new approach methodology. So for audience members, NAMs are new biotechnological tools which are based on human relevant principles. So they'll use things like stem cells and create organoids, which are mini organs or organ on chips, which are based on human biology. And so you'll use patient cells instead of using an animal model, for example. And these have been nascent for the past few decades, but now globally they are gaining a lot of support. The FDA recently passed announced that all new proposals that they would be accepting should have at least one NAMS component to it, or at least it should be thought of. It shouldn't be only animal models. So there's a shift from animal models to these newer approach methodologies. And so for someone outside science, it might not sound like a big deal, but someone who understands the method of drug discovery and drug testing, this is quite a huge paradigm shift. The way that US FDA has been working on it is that it has been collecting a lot of data for the past 10 years across different organizations, and now they are making policy changes on the basis of this data. India also is very proactive in reflecting these changes, but we don't have an Indian ecosystem of collecting India relevant data, from Indian scientists. You have been involved in a lot of these, policy discussions in India and abroad. Could you just briefly tell what are the gaps, what is missing right now in India for us to make indigenous policies which are relevant to our ecosystem, our scientific ecosystem?
Okay, so so the NAMS is again kind of, for the audience, I will just repeat, is that when we do to a drug to come to the market, it has to go through something known as preclinical trial, which is done in the lab on the petri dish or in the animal, and then it comes to the clinical trial, which is done on human. Now, 90 to 95% of the cases, when the molecules are got approved during the preclinical trial, but fail in the clinical trial. Meaning is that our preclinical trial models are not really good, and we really need to improve it. There comes the approach of this NAMS. Now, as Tejaswini has mentioned, that globally there is a shift that is happening, that we need the human relevant model. In India, we still don't have any regulatory bodies, any kind of center of excellence, any center that will validate. CPHMS is one that is doing it, but a kind of a collective data bank. So we have, there are a lot of the things that can be done. I think one thing that should start right now is forming a committee at the central level, which will kind of look into it. And then, as Mr. Ramesh was suggesting, kind of democratizing the process to use all the stakeholders, getting them on board and kind of understand that what is required. Something that was being discussed in the previous panel also, in the AI panel, that lot of the things that is coming from the Western world, that say like, using the Caucasian genetics, that does not apply to us. So we need really India-centric or, India-centric approach, which needs to be done. And as I said, it can start from a high-level committee to start with, and then democratizing the process.
So recently, for the first time, there was a question on NAMS in the parliament, but it's a very, I would say, superficial question about what has been done. There was no, commitment for further progress. And so my question goes to Mr. Ramesh, that are MPs willing to advocate for science or represent science in the parliamentary discussions and debates, and push from that side as well, and gain importance on a national level for science topics specifically? And what will it take for a science topic to be important enough to be on your list of questions or list of topics you want to discuss?
Well, frankly, scientific discussions on scientific topics rarely take place. I've been a member of parliament now for 21 years, and I have not, I've tried to initiate debates on scientific issues. We've had one debate after Chandrayaan 3, but that was not a debate. That was speech making. I've tried to have a debate on GM crops. We have not had that debate. I've tried to have a debate on nuclear policy. We have not had debates in that sense. See, one of the things that is lacking in our system is that scientific academies do not take an active interest in science communication. Now, if you look at the United States, the National Academy of Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, these are the people who are outreach to the senators, to the congressmen, to the public at large, to the media. But where are our scientific academies? We have the Indian Academy of Sciences, we have the National Academy of Sciences, we have the Indian National Science Academy, we have the National Medical Academy, we have an Agriculture Academy. We have at least 6 or 7 apex academies. And my feeling is that if academies take a much more active interest on issues, bring together in a collective manner the research body that exists in different institutions, and then reach out to legislators and to the public, it will be far more effective, and it would also project a collective view of the scientific community. Now, for example, you gave the example of B.T. Brinjal. In the case of B.T. Brinjal, I had a meeting with all these scientific academies, and I told the academies, you give me what you think on GM crops. Forget what I think. Forget what the researchers are saying. Forget what the government is saying. What does the National Agricultural Academy, what does the Indian National Science Academy, what does the National Academy of Medical Sciences, what is your view? You have a discussion amongst yourselves and you present a collective view. Unfortunately, that exercise could not be taken forward too significantly. So I would recommend very strongly that scientific academies in India take a much more active role in communication and reaching out to Parliament, to the media, and so on. You see, Parliament, the debate takes place only when we have an outstanding success. When we land something on the moon, or we have a nuclear explosion, or we have something that can be sold by the government in power, then we have a sort of a discussion. But a proper debate on, why are landslides and earthquakes becoming more frequent? Why are extreme event days becoming more frequent? In my experience, in the last 21 years, we've had only 2 debates on global warming. On what it means for Indian agriculture, what it means for Indian health, what it means for Indian energy. And one of the reasons for that is that the scientific community, as a community, has not really reached out to the people, in Parliament and outside. So if a consortium of IITs get together, if a consortium of research laboratories get together, then you present a collective view on behalf of the community to those in power. And I think that is something that we should be trying much more on a much larger scale than we have.
So, would the topic of, having these specific institutions with professionals whose main job is to get scientists together and get all the evidence in one place, can this itself be something that you can raise at the Parliament, that this is something which is needed, which is the, need of the hour, and there's, funding and support required, and then that can maybe balloon into a lot of, supplementary evidence and data which will inform policy in the future?
See, the members of Parliament where do they get their information from? They get their information from government bodies. They get their information from the ministries. They get their information from the government in power. And I'm saying we should open up the channels of communication as far as members of parliament is concerned, the general public is concerned. And the best way is if the researchers, if the scientists themselves, like what Dr. Mazumdar mentioned, that they are working with independent institutions to regularly update for public what their research that is being done in his laboratory and other laboratories. That keeping the members of parliament constantly aware of what is happening. Now, for example, if you ask any MP today, what is happening on battery research? What are we doing in rare earths? I can tell you, nobody will know. Only the government of India knows. Only the secretary in the Department of Science and Technology will know. But do the members of parliament know? Do the general public know? Or do the scientists, science communicators know? No, very few. Now we have a standing committee on science and technology. Okay, we have 31 members. Maybe they're a little better informed because, the ministries will come. But again, their source of information is the ministry. It's not the scientific community. So I think the scientific community has to play a much more significant and collective role in India. And today the scientific community is very large in India. It's not like what it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago. You have young scientists, you have a large number of scientists who are interested in science communication, a large number of scientists whom I meet who are publishing in the popular journals, popular media, and not only in peer-reviewed journals. So I think we have to bring all of them together.
Yeah, I think that was very well said. So, Shrishti, your job is to, inform public and get all of this evidence from different people. And now, if we were to make an institution like this, who is at the knowledge broker stage, what do you think these institutions should focus on? What should be the principles that they work on, which is not currently there? Because journalists are still doing this. They are informing, they are writing articles, but it's not going to MPs clearly, right? So do you think that there should be more credibility? There should be a big name associated with them, or should it be more, proactive to reaching out these people? It should be already made in collaboration with MPs and scientists.
I think to answer that question, I'll just highlight how it really works for us as science journalists. I think to begin with, I would say that I think science journalism is no longer mainstream today, is no longer niche, it's mainstream. I think every news organization, whether it's print, digital, broadcast, needs to have a science journalist who actually focuses on reporting science. I mean, gone are the days where it used to be a cluster of beats, you have to garnish it with science because otherwise, it won't work. So today, every story has a science connect. Now talking about this, see, we pick up stories which, now there's a lot of research happening across labs in the country. There's a stellar research, I would say. Scientists have spent decades of work. But as journalists, for us, is to identify the research which has implications for the society on, at large. And it's not just humans, of course, wildlife, environment, and now climate as well. There's this whole conversation now, when it comes to climate, because I focus on climate a lot, that there's still a gap in terms of research, because a lot of research which comes is from the developed countries. We need a lot more research from the developing countries. Of course, it's happening. Maybe it's not getting highlighted enough. So there's that data gap, especially in terms of climate. And of course, and in terms of the researches happening in across labs, of course, we as journalists will, of course, look out for those stories. But for us also to remain aware, I think the institutes can really help if they have a separate, let's say if they have a separate communication cell, because scientists sometimes are not very confident if they have to directly reach out to journalists because of that, lack of trust, I would say. So, and it has to happen quicker. And I would also say, I think it's important. So when science journalists are reporting stories and not conventional journalists, I think the criteria becomes that the research that you're reporting is at least peer reviewed. Of course, there are certain checklists that you have to follow. It's like sacrosanct, right? The research that you're coming across, is it peer reviewed? Is it published in a reputed journal? You speak to the researcher, and of course, then you speak to other scientists also who are working in that area. And here the problem comes because a lot of scientists would not talk about the work that the others are doing. Okay, and another problem I think we as journalists also face is when it comes to really important issues which the larger public is talking about. In a time like this, we get a lot of, it's very difficult for us to reach out to scientists who would talk openly. And as journalists, it's very difficult to carry stories with anonymous quotes, right? So, and like I said before, we are not experts, right? We have to back on scientists to tell us the stories. And like we were discussing earlier, there have been certain issues, I would say, like I would like to give good examples in certain projects of national importance that have come up in recent years. There have been groups of scientists, conservationists who have, written open letters, who have kind of collected support. So they're coming out. So when something like that happens, we as journalists, it becomes easier for us to know that, okay, these are the different kinds of opinion out there. And we'll be able to report better on that. And I think, yeah. And also, I would highlight that, see, as journalists, whatever the organizations in power would say, we have to report it because it comes from a position of authority. But it's not the final word, right? So we have to have different opinions on every subject, and we need to include that diverse voices in our stories. And I would like the discussion that we were we were having earlier. I did a story 2 to 3 years back about how much of issues like climate are being discussed in the parliament. And of course, the result was, like we were discussing earlier, that the MPs are not asking enough about climate. But I think it's a cycle that goes on. If the media talks about it, the parliament picks it up. But of course, the scientists are at the core of it.
Because now the scientists are at the core of it, I feel the burden to respond to it. Okay? See, there are actually multiple issues why we do not do that. Okay? I mean, obviously, one thing, we don't know how to do it. We don't realize the importance. But more than that, another thing is that my time is limited. Say, for example, I used to run one Bengali YouTube channel on science, but then I stopped that because I could not manage time. So until and unless my science communication is not incentivized, I had to prioritize my time. But the final thing is that we are also under a lot of restrictions. For example, my service rule says that I am not supposed to give any quotation or anything to the news media that will strain the relationship of the institute with the state government or to the central government. Now, if I am talking about a policy, and if it is a scientific comment that may go against the state or the central policy, so then who will safeguard me, right? So I think it is a kind of a cycle. I don't know where to break it, but as kind of Srishti pointed out, it is a multiple layer. And I mean, until and unless science communication is incentivized and scientists get at least some kind of safety net while they talk to the legislator or the journalist, I think most of the scientists will still hesitate to talk openly.
Thank you for all of these really good points. So what I can say that there is a lacuna which needs to be filled where we need the building of trust, we need democratization of ideas, we need a safeguard mechanism to make sure that nobody is witch hunted, so to speak, because of their ideas, because ideas have power, right? And that's why we're talking about it here. Now, I mean, it's not done yet, but all of us clearly want to move in that direction. We all have our own constraints. So I would like to, have an exercise with all of you where if you imagine a science to policy framework, which might exist in 10 or 15 years, what would that look like for you, from your point of view? Where if tomorrow a science is coming up and it has the power to do, a lot of change, and you can directly talk to an MP, you can directly talk to a governor, and they will listen to you, right? So how would that look for you? So maybe we can start with Mr. Ramesh and then move down.
Well, I think the point that Dr. Mazumdar has raised is absolutely vital. Uh, there is far too many restrictions in scientific institutions and in the scientific community to outreach. Too many questions are asked if you communicate. Uh, you know, and sometimes you're seen, if you're communicating effectively, you're seen to be not to be a scientist. If you're a good scientist, you don't communicate properly. That is the mindset we have. If somebody is able to write well, somebody speaks in simple language, अरे यार वो क्या scientist है, वो जानता नहीं है, सिर्फ बोलने आता है, लिखने आता है. This is the mindset we have. So I think I agree with Dr. Mazumdar. We need to change the way we manage our scientific institutions. There are far too many rules, far too many procedures. There's far too much government control in our scientific institutions. And if we really liberate our scientific institutions, make them self-running, make them self-governing, their funding can come from government, they can come from different sources. But I, for one, have consistently believed that criticism is the fundamental, questioning is the fundamental principle of science. If Dr. Mazumdar is not able to question what I am saying, is not able to tell me, Mr. Ramesh, you are wrong, then he is not a good scientist. He should be able to tell me that, and I should have the patience and I should have the large-heartedness to listen to him and work out a middle path. That is missing in our system. And I entirely agree with you. The management of our scientific institutions, the interface of the scientific institutions with the government, with the media, has to change dramatically. And there has to be far greater autonomy. And autonomy automatically will bring in accountability. I think if you make institutions autonomous, automatically, if I give Dr. Mazumdar the freedom, he will discover that he knows he'll have to be accountable. There may be an occasional person who will misuse that autonomy, but that's the price you pay for scientific freedom.
Thank you. So now that Mr. Ramesh has told about how academia should reform, maybe you can talk about how governmental bodies should reform from your perspective.
I think the government bodies, while we are, autonomous, but our policies are again framed by the government or the governing bodies, right? So as I said, that the service rule that is there, removing that service rule is not in my or our hand. So that can come from the top, right? So I completely agree with Mr. Ramesh is that we need to go from a trust deficit society to a trust and enabling society. We have to trust each other. There will be something here and there, often. Not often, sometime. But that is the part of the whole game, right? I'll just add one thing what Mr. Ramesh said, just a personal anecdote. Something happened, I'm not going into the details. One of my seniors told me that if you do things like this, you will be termed as rebel. And you are very young right now, you don't want to be labeled as that. And my response was that I believe being termed as rebel is a badge of honor in science. If I am not rebel, then what science I am doing? So I think that spirit has to come, and that spirit can come from the top, that the top needs to give us that, okay, we trust you and you go ahead. And some channel should be there. Again, the academies are the main body that can kind of collectively raise their voice, but there also should be some channel where the individual scientists should be able to reach the MPs or the legislatures. Thank you.
I would not shift the attention to the government or the scientists, but I think it's time the media. I mean, there's a lot of focus there, but I would say that we as science journalists, I think I'm an optimist. I understand that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we are living in a very divisive society. There are, most of my, not most, but several of my stories, when I put it out, the scientific background to it, I get a lot of backlash because they're not going by the norm of the entire, the public opinion which has generated. But I would still say that we need to remain an optimist. Like we need to, even the scientists, they need, I mean, they shouldn't really lose hope. Like sometimes what happens is that there are some very controversial issues, and when I speak to scientists, some really great scientists, they would say, Srishti, you know how it's going. It's not going to change anything. It's, even if I, quote, if I give you the quote, if I tell you the background of it, first, chances are that it may not be reported. Second is I'll get the backlash and you will get the backlash. But I think I would still say there is space for good science journalism across print, across digital, and of course across TV also. Whatever little space we have, we need to own it, because like I said earlier, if we leave that gap and if we leave that to uncertainty, there would be people, and there are a lot of people that will drown out the one voice of reason. So we shouldn't lose hope, and I think we should, our loyalty as a science journalist, and there are a lot of senior science journalists sitting here, will understand that our loyalty is towards scientific evidence. Whatever story comes to us, whether it's a government policy, whatever research the scientists are doing, let's just root it on the evidence, on data, and let's try to speak to as many people as we can. And of course, because this time, like there are a lot of senior journalists here, they have seen much more, but this time in 2025, especially here, we need science in all our stories. We need that data connect, we need that scientific evidence, and we need to, I think, a lot of responsibility falls on us as journalists to gain that confidence with our scientists and researchers, and prove that yes, we can actually report better. Thank you.
That was a very hopeful and optimistic way, I feel, that this has concluded. And I thank all of you for your candor and your, openness and willingness to talk about these contentious issues. And I feel like all of us have a to-do list now towards a better future, what we can do, what are the steps we can take. And with that, in the interest of time, I'd like to open to audience questions. Yeah, ma'am.
So, I am a knowledge broker, and I work specifically in the space between scientists and policymakers, and also science and practice. And I've seen firsthand, because we have a model that we use, and this model was actually designed to take a particular concept called nutrition-sensitive agriculture to the agricultural scientist table. It was a 6-year project, of course, and largely funded by the UK government. And this was actually brought forth by the Swaminathan Foundation, which was pioneering in taking science to policy, as we already do. So there is always space to take science to policy, and I've seen firsthand and across South Asia, it is in Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. So I think, having worked in the field of knowledge brokering, taking science evidence policy making, there is enough and plenty models, theoretically speaking, and for practical application. And I think if you do research for the purpose of research and not research for the purpose of policy uptake, then it's difficult for scientists to be able to communicate to you so that you can table it for policy. So I think it's the research institutions that have to take the responsibility to see that the research is designed or tabled in such a way that it is evidence-based for policy.
Thank you for that really insightful comment. Yeah, please, Shreya.
So, we recently heard of Vigyan Prasar being dissolved. It was a hard hit for everyone, especially everyone here. And there was a lot of coverage, a lot of long-length pieces about why that's a good thing. consulting, and a lot of questions asked about what now. Despite that, I think this was a huge loss for everyone, and I wanted to know from a policy perspective or from policymaker perspective, from scientific institutions, what that loss meant for us moving forward now. This has happened last year, and how do we navigate this independent organization now not being present anymore for science communication?
Maybe Mr. Ramesh, you can start.
I think that the full question, sorry, the voice was blurred.
So, Vigyan Prasad, an independent organization, was recently dissolved, and that has a lot of implications for, science communication. So, I think she wants to ask, how do you move forward, and what is the cost for policymakers and scientists because of this decision?
Sorry, something is wrong with my connection, sorry. Why don't you just, I'm trying to fix, your voice is getting...
Sure. So maybe Dr. Abhijit, you can...
I'll refix it.
Maybe Dr. Abhijit, you can move forward, and people on Zoom, can you maybe type it for him so that, he knows the question and then you can answer later. Yeah.
Obviously that's a loss. That was an independent body and that was there. It's definitely a loss. But then at the same time, I personally feel that nothing is, there is always way to kind of, coming the new things up, right? I would be happier if some new model would have come first and then it was dissolved. I would be, happier there. But okay, it has happened. But I'm sure some new model, some new structure will come. And in fact, again, in the today's world, the way the communication has changed, the rapid communication, even the Vigyan Prasad, they also need to evolve, right? To cater to the today's generation, today's audience, right? As I say, the today's audience is a 1.5 minute reel audience, right? So we need to kind of cater to that. Probably Vigyan Prasad was not doing that in that sense. Do you want to?
Mr. Ramesh, did you get the question? Would you like to comment?
No, I didn't. Actually, now I can hear you better. Just repeat it. Yeah.
Okay, so there's an organization, Vigyan Prasad, and it was recently dissolved. And yes, and so she wants to know what is the loss to policymakers and scientists, and where to go from this.
Well, Vigyan Prasad, I had something to do with the establishment of Vigyan Prasad in the late 1980s, and it was meant for science communication. It was meant to train a whole generation of science communicators, and one by one, all these institutions. Now, Indian Science Congress has also been dissolved. Science Congress used to be a one annual gathering every January where 5,000, 6,000 people would gather, and there would be opportunities for interaction and popularization of science. That also has gone, and now we're going to have, what is it called now? Science, Technology and Innovation. So, that's the name of the Indian Science Congress has changed. So all these institutions are undergoing a change, but, I'm not opposed to change at all. But we need to change, we need to renew our institutions. But I think in the name of renewal, what is happening is that the diversity of opinion is getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And anybody who has a different point of view from what is considered to be the mainstream view is, to use Dr. Mazumdar's word, considered to be a rebel, considered to be somebody outside the mainstream. So I come back to this. Scientific institutions have to be run independently and democratically. They must have the freedom to express their views on scientific issues. And science does not function in a social vacuum. Scientists will have views on different issues of society. And I see no harm in why scientists cannot, issue a statement, say, on an urgent public issue which is not necessarily related to their issue or area of specialization. But unfortunately now, the overall environment is less tolerant of different opinions, of divergent views. And that's not good. And I think this is also the impact of the social media. Because what the social media does is it drowns out alternative points of view. And people say ecosystem, ecosystem. It's ECHO system, not ECO system. It's an ecosystem. We are all echoing each other. So, that's not good for the spirit of science. That's why in the 1950s, people like Nehru, Bhabha, Sarabhai, Dhawan, all these great names of Indian science talked not only of science, but they talked of scientific temper. That scientific temper is very important, It's the environment of science, the atmosphere of science. That scientific temper is very, very important. It's not just science. You can build scientific institutions, but how do you inculcate scientific temper in schools, in colleges?
You're back, yeah. We can take one last question. Maybe ma'am in black, yeah.
So my question is from the journalist's perspective. You talked about how institutions can be slow in giving information to you as a journalist, but I also see that in social media there's this pop science popping up, right? And you perhaps would never be able to catch up with the deluge of information that's out there that is unscientific also. How are journalists trying to recover from this, or even journalist houses, media houses?
We are really in I would say we are fighting. We are fighting 24/7 because we have this joke among journalists that we are now not really competing with other journalists, but we are competing with influencers. Because before the story gets out, you have already have a reel on it, especially, so I cover space, and space is something that influencers love. Nothing against it. It's very good, but I think it's also important that it's just not based on public narrative, right? Journalism, of course, it doesn't require that every journalist needs to have a degree, but yes, we have certain skill set, right? And it requires us to be rigorous with what we are reporting, and that's accuracy. Like I said, it's sacrosanct. Okay, so when you put it out anything on social media, how do you verify it? Okay, I have this. I would say I feel a strong disappointment when I'm doing a story. Let's say it takes a few hours, and God forbid it takes a day. By the time I reach out to institutes, get the scientists, there's already a reel which has got over 2 million views. Okay, and that has already shaped the public agenda. And that reel goes to the newsrooms, that goes to the editors, and the pressure builds up. Then what I end up doing, end of the day, is actually debunking the myths that reel has already propagated. But we are living in a digital media space, it's something that we cannot deny, but we really need to adapt. And that is why I'm saying that we as journalists, of course, we are fighting, we go against time to get that right story out. So we need that help from the institutes also. A lot of institutes are understanding that point. They do have their communication cells. For example, they understand that, okay, this is something that is being talked about in media, so let's help those journalists with the right amount of research that is happening there, so we can quote it and in a TV space or in a digital space, because the time is very less. Even for the newspapers, journalists who are reporting for print, they also have to fight for digital stories. So we need to get that story out, and that's how it can happen. So yeah, we need to adapt. I mean, digital is something that you'll have to acquire that skill set. But yes, You can't undermine accuracy. You have to be accurate. Be a minute late and get, probably get a scolding from your editor, but get your story right. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Shrishti. So this has been a very productive discussion where we talked about the current, new challenges, old challenges, and what is not happening, and the fact that the systems that used to work won't work anymore because of new challenges like digital media, AI, misinformation, and but the good part is that there is a silver lining and every end is a new beginning. And there is a space for making new institutions. There's a space for making new ways of communication. And clearly, everyone involved wants to do that. Scientists, policymakers, journalists. All of you have that rebel and fighter spirit inside of you who does not want to give up. And I think that is what matters when you're facing something which is as unknown as the future, right? And so I hope this is the first step into making a policy to science to society framework which is future ready and which is democratized and for our nation. And thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time out and giving your thoughts. And thank you, SJAI, for giving a space to this very important discussion. These three sets of people, journalists, scientists, and MPs, they don't traditionally get together on one stage very often. They have very separate community, separate conferences, and separate ways of doing things. So for all of you to come here, that itself for me is a big achievement, and I'm really happy, thankful for Shubhra and all of the SJI team to, make this happen. And in the spirit of solutions journalism, I feel like this is a good end to this really wonderful conference. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. Thank you, sir. And
Thank you.
that brings us to towards the end of a fulfilling conference.